Hey, what's going on, gang? Nate on the Stone here. Welcome back to my channel, to the 104th edition of The Rolling Stone. The skies grow darker yet, and the seas rise higher, to quote G.K. Chesterton's epic poem, The Ballad of the White Horse, which is actually a very fitting poem for our time. It's all about King Alfred and his desperate attempt to save Britain, save his kingdom from the invading Danes, who have decided that it is the perfect time to loot, plunder, and enslave the Anglo-Saxons of the island after the Romans, who have been there for a couple hundred years actually, have completely left Britain because they have to try and save Rome, the Eternal City, from the invading Visigoths from Germany. And that poem, I had to read that in high school. I don't know if anyone else in public school actually has to read The Ballad of the White Horse. Maybe if you're in a private Christian school, that's an assigned book. I remember reading it in high school and being an unappreciative little snob, absolutely hating the poem, hating Chesterton, and then coming back to it, of course, when I was about 10 years older, thinking, my God, I mean, this is brilliant stuff, this is great, and now looking back on it again in the times that we are living through right now, and thinking, my gosh, this is actually, you could read this out loud in the public square, and people would think that you are talking about these times. Change a few names, change a few places, change the setting just a little bit, and you could actually have a fairly good and accurate description of the times that we are living in. I wish I had good news to give, but we will put as good, we will be as optimistic, not optimistic, but we will be as hopeful as we can. There's a difference between optimism and hope. So, let's just get right down to business, gang. There were two big events that happened this past week. The first one was Andrew Cuomo's resignation as the governor of New York State. And honestly, I was going to talk about that as the first video for this edition of the Rolling Stone. And then I realized that this other big event was actually more important, and I actually had more to say about it. But as far as Andrew Cuomo is concerned, let me just say this so that it is on the record that I did say something. I didn't just ignore it as it rolled on by the timeline. With Andrew Cuomo's resignation, this is now the third governor of New York State in a row who has had to step down because of sexual harassment, sexual impropriety allegations. And all three of them, Cuomo and his two predecessors, were all Democrats. All belong to the Democrat Party, which is interesting just in and of itself. But even more than that, it really showed for me how the game is played. Andrew Cuomo was one of the most lionized public officials this past year. I mean, he was the grand hero of COVID, okay? All he did was allow thousands of senior citizens across the state of New York to be slaughtered because, you know, he kept people imprisoned in nursing homes who were infected with COVID. And so they were passing it around amongst them, these 70, 80, 90-year-old Americans who then keeled over and died. You know, he was keeping them in the nursing homes. He didn't make use of the two Navy medical ships that former President Trump sent to New York to help with that. And then he had his people publicly lie about the death tolls in those senior citizen centers, and for all this, Cuomo was applauded. He was with Stephen Colbert. He was with, what's that dopey guy named? Trevor Noah, I think. He was with, who's the other one? Jimmy Fallon. He was on all their shows, yucking it up. He won a special Emmy Award for his handling of the COVID crisis. You know, he was writing a book, or at least a book with his name on it, was published. People were describing themselves. I can't think about this without shuddering, gang. But people were referring to themselves as Cuomo-sexuals. My gosh, Andrew Cuomo had done such a bang-up job in defeating COVID in New York State that women and probably some men, literally wanted to bang Cuomo himself. There were cups, there were mugs with his aging, shaggy, craggy face on it. And on the sides were the words Cuomo sexual. And now, all of that has been burned down because now it came out that Cuomo was actually sexually assaulting women in the governor's office, doing all sorts of really loathsome things to women. I mean, like, putting his hands underneath skirts, putting his hands underneath blouses, and then he actually had the gall to try and blame it all on, well, I'm Italian. I'm Italian. Like, yeah, thanks a lot. The people who say, why, we have to eradicate all stereotypes. Well, he was trying to rely on the old stereotype of Italian men all being lascivious Othellos, to try and keep his pathetic little job. But what it really shows, gang, I think, is that the narrative of the left will only go so far to help you. At the end of the day, for all the praise that the left bestowed upon him, he was still a straight, cis, white man. And so finally, when the facade collapsed, the narrative could only go so far. And then it was much more convenient to throw Cuomo to the wolves. Now, of course, it's all very possible that he will rise again like some sort of dark phoenix and come back even more popular in some sort of position. He's going to be okay financially. I mean, he's not going to go to jail. He's probably not going to go to trial or anything like that. I would be very surprised if he does. But it was just very interesting to note that the narrative will only protect you to a point, and then it stops. This isn't the days of Bill Clinton, when Bill Clinton could rape Monica Lewinsky in the Oval Office, and even her blue dress couldn't convict him. In fact, people just said, well, Clinton is just a very good liar. And women were actually excusing his behavior because, well, you know what, he might be a little touchy-feely grabby, but at the very least, he kept abortion legal, and for that, he's owed a blowjob. And I'm serious. I believe it was, who was it? Was it Joy Reid? Was it someone? I forget. Someone who I believe used to be on The View at the time that all went down in the mid-90s, 1996, 1997, actually said that it was women's duties to get the knee pads out and, give Bill Clinton a favor he would appreciate because he had kept abortion legal. And the rapes, well, you gotta take the good with the bad, you know what I mean? So that was very interesting, which actually in and of itself means that white progressives are only going to become more and more froth-foamed rabid in their allegiance to the ideology, because now the message has been clear. Yeah, you can say all the right things, you can do all the right things, but if your toe slips, no matter how much, and with Cuomo, it slipped a lot, but no matter how little your toe slips out of line, if you are a straight, white, cis male, or even woman, then you only get so much protection. You only have so much monopoly money that you are allowed to spend to defend yourself. And when that's gone, the door. So you can expect them to take that message to heart and to become even more rabid. And we will actually talk about that a little later in the future. But that's Governor Cuomo. Those are just my initial thoughts on Governor Cuomo. Now, for the remainder of this episode, and I'm going to have to talk fast because I see I've already been talking for 9 minutes, let's talk about the really big issue, which is that Afghanistan is falling again to the Taliban. Gang, folks, this has to be one of the most embarrassing things in the world. The United States hasn't even officially pulled out of Afghanistan. I'm recording this on Friday the 13th, that's apropos, and I believe that the current occupant of the White House had said back in June or July that the U.S. was going to be completely out of Afghanistan by September 11th of 2021, which just adds insult to injury. Fact of the matter, however, is it's not even September 11th yet. We're almost a month away still from the complete withdrawal deadline. And the Taliban has taken over 2/3 of the country again. The Taliban has taken over 2/3 of Afghanistan. From CBS News, Taliban's stunning lightning advance in Afghanistan continues. The Taliban have captured another 3 provincial capitals in southern Afghanistan, including in Helmand, the scene of some of the heaviest fighting in the past 2 decades, as the insurgents press a lightning offensive that is gradually encircling the capital of Kabul. The loss of Helmand's provincial capital comes after years of toil and blood spilled by American, British, and Allied NATO forces. Hundreds of foreign troops were killed there over the course of the nearly 2-decade war. The insurgents have taken more than a dozen provincial capitals in recent days and now control more than 2/3 of the country just weeks before the U.S. plans to withdraw its last troops. While Kabul isn't directly under threat, yes, the losses and the battles elsewhere further tighten the grip of a resurgent Taliban who continue to press the offensive. And what has been the Biden administration's response to all this, gang? I mean, it has been worthy of a Monty Python sketch. Seriously, when you hear some of these buffoons in the Biden administration prattle on and on and on about this catastrophe, you halfway expect Eric Idle or John Cleese to be up there, doing their best imitations, putting their best foot forward to give the audience a laugh, because you have to sit down and wonder, are these people this removed from reality? And the answer is yes, they are. So, for example, the State Department has said that the United States is no longer going to have an ambassador in Afghanistan. Don't worry, it is going to have a strong diplomatic presence in Afghanistan, but no ambassador. In fact, more American troops are actually going into Afghanistan right now. Isn't that ironic? What is it, 28 days, so about 4 weeks before the last U.S. troops were supposed to leave Afghanistan, more troops are actually going in to help evacuate the American embassy in Kabul, the Afghan capital. Even worse than that, the State Department was actually asking the Taliban to pretty please don't attack the American embassy in Kabul. Pretty please leave us alone. As if the Taliban would actually give credence to that request. I don't know. Maybe all of these people are super geniuses and they figured that the Taliban would all die of laughter after they heard that request. Maybe that was the plan. If it was, in the words of Tony Stark, not a great plan, because as you can see, as I just read, the Taliban has 2/3 of the country. But what really has to take the gold in this instance was Jen Psaki, who said with a serious straight face that, the Taliban is going to have to consider its international reputation, how it wants the international community to see it, and that is going to determine its actions in Afghanistan. The implication being that, if the Taliban just wants the approval of the world, it's going to have to play nice. It's going to have to stop this offensive. As if the Taliban was not a terrorist organization that was dedicated to wiping out Western civilization as a whole. They know this. Those buffoons in the White House know this. They have to know this. Because if they don't know this, it's a messed up deal either way, gang. Because they're either lying through their teeth or they are blitheringly incompetent. Those are the only choices. And neither one gives me much comfort. Now, the big takeaway from all this, there are two, as a matter of fact, that are interrelated. The first one is that this is the end of the American empire, and this is the official end of the post-World War II era, the post-World War II geopolitical state of affairs. Ever since World War II, really officially starting in 1954, I believe, was the Suez Crisis, the United States has been seen, correctly, it was seen, as the world's lone superpower. The USSR for a while was considered second, but that's just because it had nukes. The USSR was basically, I wouldn't say a third world country, but it was second, but it was definitely a second world country that just happened to have nuclear weapons because of the atomic spy ring that had been operating here in the United States since the 40s. And then after the fall of the USSR in 1990, I believe was the official fall of the USSR, the United States was seen as the world's lone superpower. We had about 10, 11 years of being undisputed top dog of the world. What we said went. And now all of that has gone. It's all gone. It has all crumbled because the very fact that a third world terrorist organization has been able to retake 2/3 of a country before the so-called liberating forces of the United States have even completely withdrawn from the country is an embarrassment. Gang, the fact that after almost 20 years spilling blood, sweat, treasure, and resources into that hellhole of a country, that the Taliban is actually still alive, still existing, and is still able to actually perform these feats, that would be an embarrassment in and of itself. The lone superpower in the world, so-called, people still claim that title, though in much more hushed voices these days, and understandably so, the lone superpower of the world should be able to crush a third world terrorist organization like an ant. There shouldn't have been a contest. This war should have been over in a year, 2 years tops. That should have been the end of it. The fact that we failed is a sign that America no longer has the spirit, the willpower, the sense of civilizational superiority to actually do anything. We are useless. Yeah, we've got a lot of shiny weapons and ooh, cool, big boomsticks. None of that means a squat, gang. You could have the most technologically advanced military and society in the world, and it won't mean anything if you don't actually have the willpower to stand and fight for something that you believe in. And that's the second point that this story, that this ongoing event is showing us. The Taliban, to repeat for a third time, is a third world terrorist organization. It doesn't probably have a fifth or even a tenth maybe of the weapon systems, the armory, the resources that the American military has. The American military, which is the most lavishly funded military in the world, except maybe for China now. So how did they win? How were they able to do this, to take over 2/3 of the country in a matter of weeks? They have faith and they have willpower. They have faith and willpower. Faith and willpower will always beat technological superiority. Because if you don't have the will, if you don't believe anything, okay, gang, if you honestly don't believe in a quasi-chauvinistic way that your civilization, your way of life is better, objectively better than the people that you're fighting, well then you're not really going to have the will to fight the enemy, because what really are you fighting for? At some point you have to ask yourself that. At what point, for what are you fighting? That answer, because even back in 2001, we were becoming a squishy nation. We were gelatining. We just didn't know it yet. The gelatin was still kind of, in the middle. We still had the facade of abs. So no one, I think, really noticed it. And when people noticed it a little bit, it pointed it out. We're like, oh, that's just on the fringe. Those are just, the little love handles. Well, everyone gets those a little bit as you get old. I mean, come on. We're pushing 250 years old. I mean, come on. Forgive a little of the love handles, okay? It was blown off, laughed off. And so the process was allowed to continue. So we didn't have a sense of superiority. We did not have a sense of, okay, we're right, they're wrong. Remember, we weren't at war. We were at war with radical Islam. We were in a war with terrorism. Very squishy terms, very squishy ideas. And because those ideas and those terms were so squishy, we didn't have the willpower. We didn't have the willpower to actually fight. The Taliban were smart. They had something that they were willing to die for, something that they were willing to live for, something that they were willing to wait 20 years until the time was right. And that is going to beat your technological pseudo-magic any day of the week. And if I could add just one more thing to that, gang. Social media on this issue has been really fascinating because the neocon on the right, the neocons and the paleocons have been shooting at each other as they usually do. I mean, if I had to choose one or the other, I'd probably say that I'm a paleocon with imperialistic tendencies, so sue me. The neocons have been saying that this is just proof that the Biden administration has no idea what it's doing. Its foreign policy is a disaster. This is why we couldn't leave Afghanistan yet. Everything that we fought for is going down the toilet. The paleocons, meanwhile, are pointing at that at the neocons and saying, you had 20 years and you couldn't even clean up the Taliban. Your solution is always military intervention, and it's not working. And yet, like the madman, you always call for more military intervention. I think that both sides miss the big point, that the American empire is crumbling. And yes, I said American empire over a year ago, January 2020. I made a whole video about that concept, which is a foreign concept for most of us today. I will link that video at the end of this one. But I will just very basically say again what I said in that video. America did become an imperial power after World War II, definitely after the Suez Crisis, where the imperial mantle, for lack of a better word, was transferred from Britain to America, which, as Mark Stein has said, was one of the smoothest transfers of power ever in history, because it was going from Britain to America, and whether you like it or not, we're basically first cousins with the British. And one of the iron rules of history, gang, is that there always has to be an empire. You look through world history, there is always an empire. There is always a center of learning, of art, of political and military and cultural power. Whether we're talking about Egypt, whether we're talking about Persia, whether we're talking about Rome, whether we're talking about the Holy Roman Empire, whether we're talking about the British Empire, there is always some sort of imperial power that acts as the nucleus for the world or for a large geographic area of the world. So if the American Empire is crumbling, which it is, then that iron law of history says that that vacuum is going to be filled up by something. And guess who's just waiting to fill in the wings? That's right. Ding, ding, ding. It's China. Now, I'm not going to sit here and say that the current American regime is objectively better than China, because at this point, honestly, it's two sides of the same coin. It's two different aspects of Gnostic totalitarianism. But this is where our responsibility comes in, gang. It's our responsibility to capture the institutions of power here in this country so that we can refound the American empire, reestablish it, so that we can checkmate evil entities like China and North Korea and Iran. Because whether we like it or not, if we don't check them, they're not going to be checked. And the world is not going to be a happy place with that. I'm not saying that you need to be the world's police. I'm not saying that you always need military intervention. In fact, when you don't have any sense of civilizational superiority, you can't do that, because then you end up in quagmires like Afghanistan and Iraq. But what I am saying is that there needs to be an imperial power. There just has to be. That's, like I said, one of the laws of history. And I would rather it be us than someone else, because the other options for who it would be, they don't fill me with any sort of confidence. That is story number one.